Thanks, Claire. Good morning, everybody, and thank you firstly very much for the invitation to come and talk to you. We've been involved at Collections Trust in this process that we've been hearing about this morning in a peripheral way for a number of years, and it's great to just see how much progress has been made. So I'm hugely impressed. For those of you who don't know Collections Trust, our day job is that we are a sector support organisation, core funded by Arts Council England. And we advise museums of all kinds on how to document their collections and manage their collections. But I'm specifically here today to talk about something that we've been working on for a number of years, which has now come to fruition, called the Museum Data Service. And I hope you'll see the relevance of this in view of some of the comments made earlier about the state of documentation, the need to bring documentation together and to be able to access information seamlessly. So the problem that we set ourselves to try and address was that there are just over 1,700 accredited museums in the UK, and between them we think there might be something like 80 million computerized object records. We reckon, again, this is all kind of guesstimate, but we think probably fewer than half of those records are available at all online. And where they are available, they're spread across hundreds of standalone websites, which is, frankly, not much use if you're a researcher and you're interested in something or other, and you've then got to, go and look at all sorts of, obscure websites. What we've done is to try and bring that information together without making too many assumptions about what the end use might be. So as you'll see, this is not the kind of the pretty public facing, this is the kind of nation's museum collections. It's very much a business to business utilitarian service that is bringing data together for all sorts of purposes. And I know archaeologists love to take a long view. This is something that has been on the museum sector's to-do list since literally 1888, when the keeper of the Yorkshire Museum called curators together for a meeting to talk about compiling a compendious index of their collections. It's taken a while since then. There have been a few false dawns. Some of you may remember things like Domus, Culture Grid, but they've never really got past the kind of initial demonstrator phase. So a few years ago, Collections Trust teamed up with Art UK, who I'm sure many of you will know. If you don't, go and check out their website. It's great. So they're the people who brought together records and images of all the kind of oil paintings and sculpture in public collections, and they're expanding into other media as well. And the University of Leicester is the kind of the third partner in this, and the Archaeology Data Service was very much our inspiration for this. So to have a university partner was really important, and as well as their King Richard Bothering archaeology department, Leicester is, of course, well known to the museum sector for its museum studies, which is sort of one of the first and is internationally known. So between us, Art UK, Collections Trust, University of Leicester are pretty well known across the sector, and I think that trust was really kind of important in bringing this off. Through Art UK's contacts, we got startup funding from Bloomberg Philanthropies a couple of years ago, and the baton has now been picked up in funding terms by AHRC through its programme for digital infrastructure for the arts and humanities. So we seem to be set fair for at least the short to medium term with funding for this, and perhaps in the discussion we can talk a little bit about sustainability and business models and that kind of thing. So this is the site that went live to the public last September. We had a great launch at Bloomberg's offices in London. That is the URL if you want to sort of take a look at it, but I'll just sort of show you some of the highlights just so you get a feel for the kind of information you can find already, and then I'll talk a little bit about the potential for how we might be able to knit together the kind of data we've got and the kind of data that, say, the Archaeology Data Service has. So we've got two main search interfaces at the moment. And the first deals with museums and museum collections described at a kind of very general level. So if you were interested in, which museums have got, let's say, Viking material, you could do a search. And at the moment, we're just returning 38. Now, I know there are a lot more of those, and you'll see why I say that. So if you do a search, you'll get a list of museums. And if you open up some of those museums, you will find brief summaries of their collections. And in most cases, these have come from the collection development policies that all accredited museums are required to write and submit to the Arts Council as part of the accreditation process. Unfortunately, the accreditation process does not require the sharing of those things. So it has taken us a year and the best part of 40 grand's worth of AHRC money to bring together several hundred of these. But unfortunately, many, many more museums just studiously ignored several polite emails and requests for information. So that's still a work in progress, but we have got, one way or another, collection overviews for nearly 1,000 accredited museums. Some are quite helpful and descriptive, others are more laconic, but that's the best information we have at the moment and is a great starting point. It's the sort of thing that archivists would refer to as finding aids. We've recently introduced a map-based interface as well, which is a kind of fun way of just exploring the collection level information. If you go into a detailed record about a museum and its collection, you'll see that we've used Wikidata identifiers. And that's because museums have an infuriating habit of changing their names very, very frequently. So here's a good example: Wiltshire Museum, now known as Wiltshire Museum, but better known to, for example, the National Excavation Index as Devises Museum. So we just needed to kind of pull in all of the alternative names and previous names from museums and give a unique identifier. So Wikidata has been very useful for that. We've also pulled in some other data like the accreditation number for the ACE scheme. And in this case, you can see that, yes, we do have objects, detailed object records from this museum. This is the other main search interface, the object search. And you can see from this that we've got now nearly 6 million records from 65 collection data sets. And between them, that represents something like 113 accredited museums. Because somebody like, say, Norfolk Museum Service, that's one data set, but I think about a dozen accredited museums. So we're well on the way, and we're pretty pleased with progress after only 6 months. I mean, this is well in excess of anything that Culture Grid ever achieved. Europeana, which some of you may be familiar with, has been aggregating collections from European museums for decades, with squillions of euros thrown at it. And I think they've only got something like 5 million after all those years. So we're well on the way, but we think it will take about a decade to get everybody on board. And the main problem is not a technical one. It is that problem of museums just thinking it's a bit hard and a bit difficult and being a bit embarrassed about their data and all of that. So a lot of the work we do is just persuading the benefits, making it super easy for museums to come on board. I mean, it really couldn't be easier. We've made it very, very simple. You don't have to prepare your data into any kind of schema. We'll take it however you can provide it. And we've got some very, very simple, straightforward forms and processes. So we're well on the way. If you have links to a museum that isn't currently in there, please go and badger your colleagues and persuade them to get in touch, because we will get around to everybody eventually, but the sooner we can kind of get more and more museums on board, the more useful the data becomes. So looking, doing a search for, let's say, pole staves, I'm not interested in replica ones, so it supports Boolean searching, and yeah, it's telling me already from the museums that we've got 756 examples. We've got filters on the left, so you can see where those records come from, which collections. You can see which field the keyword occurs in. We don't have images. You may have spotted this. We don't have images. That is for two reasons. One is cost. We just simply don't have the budget to support storage of images. That is a whole other problem. We're aware it's a problem. It's way above our pay grade, and we're kind of, lobbying the likes of DCMS to kind of pull their finger out and show some leadership. But we have got links to objects where those exist. So if somebody has already published an image and there is a link to that image within the data that they've let us have, then you can see that image. And then finally, you'll notice the data use license. So we're not one of those projects that insists that everybody licenses their data, as CC0 or some, we take a very agnostic view. We love open data, we don't insist on it. So this is another way of bringing museums on board, that we're super flexible about the licensing policy. This is just an example of one of the records from Wiltshire. Now, the records vary hugely in their length and complexity. So some museums are only giving us half a dozen fields that they already publish on their own websites. Others are giving us their whole database. So Wiltshire is a good example of that. And we're making, with their agreement, many of the fields public, but other fields are non-public. And we've got a very, very sophisticated way of locking down fields that museums don't want to make public to one of 3 restricted levels of access, and that gets written into the data deposit agreements. So there is a lot more going on behind the scenes, and we will soon be rolling out interfaces that would allow, for example, researchers to access information which is not public but nonetheless useful. So things like conservation information, for example, perhaps the full site locations of archaeological sites, that kind of thing. But that's just a good example of the kind of record we've got at the moment. And then you'll see at the bottom, there's a persistent shareable link. So coming back to FAIR data, we've taken data from a museum where it's sat offline, and we've made a copy of it, we've given it a persistent identifier and made it findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. You can get your hands on the data, so you can look at it on the website. If you want to download up to 1,000 records in a simple CSV, you can just click and you can just download that straight away. If you want more than 1,000 records, or if you want all the fields, there is an API token, and you can just request a token and you just get it back by return. And somebody recently built for us a very nifty little utility called the data fetcher. So you just paste the token into that, and you can then download the data either as a simple or a full CSV or as JSON. So that's just a really good way of kind of getting your hands on the data if you're that way inclined and want to really kind of start playing with the data and linking it up to other things. So that's sort of what you can find on our site. So I just want to sort of fly some kites, really, just suggest some ways that we might be able to link the kind of data that we've got to some of the other data that exists, particularly in the archaeology data service. So you will, I'm sure, without exception, be familiar with the Excavation Index. As we've got Wiltshire, and obviously that's a kind of very, very archaeologically rich county, I thought, well, I'll just search for Wiltshire Museum in here. Didn't give me anything. Devizes Museum gives me 166 results. So these are records of some kind of archaeological intervention where it says somewhere within there, yeah, the finds have gone to or are due to go to Devizes Museum. So wouldn't it be great to be able to kind of follow that train of thought down and then go, okay, and here are those objects. So here's just one example, picked more or less at random. So helpfully here we've got a site code, and there's some kind of useful information which actually does also occur in the Wiltshire records, although NB, they seem to be a slightly different site code. So a certain amount of fuzzy searching is going to be needed with all of this. So it's not a kind of exact, you just plumb in the data and you get exactly what you want. So this is going to take someone who's really, really cleverer than I am with Python to start, writing scripts that can just isolate the relevant fields and could do fuzzy searching and start to, semi-automate the process of matching object records and excavation records. But in this case, this does seem to be a match. So I would say that these objects here, are definitely from that archaeological excavation. All the details match. So what I've got in mind is that we would have as our fourth level of our data hierarchy. So we've got institutions, we've got collections, we've got the object records themselves, and then the next level down, the fourth level, is information about those object records. So I could foresee, for example, a scenario where we could have, say, a Wikibase project where we're just got lots and lots of very, very short records, triplets that just say this museum data service record is from this, or is related to, or has this relationship to this excavation index record. That would be a very simple thing to do, a very simple thing to store. And then if it was done in somewhere like Wikibase, you could then use APIs to then pull all that information together into the kind of seamless interface that I know Barney has got in mind. So with a few seconds left, I'll pause, and that's the URL. Do have a look, do explore it. We're always interested to hear feedback from people. And as I said, if you are involved in a museum, if you have links with the museum, check and see if they're on there. And if they're not, please go away and badger them. Thank you.